Right now I'm joined by Robert Pinsky, who was Poet Laureate from 2007 to 2010. He's been on this show a few times, and he continues to put up with me, for which I'm grateful. His new book is called Proverbs of Limbo, and it's also the title of an extraordinary poetry jazz CD that's the third in his installment with Lawrence Hobgood, and with this one, he's expanded the band to include more musicians, another singer, and other poets.
Yeah.
Robert, thank you so much for giving me some time here at Miami Book Fair.
Truly a pleasure, John, and my thanks to you.
So, I've been listening to the new album relentlessly. It's the CD in my car, and I have found no reason to take it out.
Yeah.
So I don't listen to it every day. It's not a cult, not yet, but a few times a week I've been listening to it. And now when I read the book, because I got the album first, I hear the album in my mind when reading the poems, including, this is maybe the fascinating part, the poems that are not on the album when I read the book.
I think that's right. I just read Roy Haynes quoting Charles Mingus, saying, "I like the way you play because you play drums not playing on the beat. The beat is in you. You suggest the beat. You're in relation to it." I thought that is exactly how poetry works, and you can't count the number of I ams or the degrees of stress. You just hear it or not. And you express the hearing, and I'm very pleased to hear you like the CD. Many people have surprised me by liking it, including my teenage grandchildren, who express astonishment that they like it. It sounds good. I'm astonished, too. I mean, the quality of the musicians, Mino Sinello, the percussionist on that album, he worked with Miles Davis. I mean, these are very good people. Most of the same band will be performing January 18th at the Regatta Bar in Cambridge, and tickets are selling well because people have heard this stuff. So it's very unlikely, and I'm passionate about it.
Well, you and Lawrence have a special relationship as collaborators, and of course, I think any good poetry, right? This is music. There's a musicality to it, but you've approached this, even though it's jazz, which means like there's a lot of freedom, but you've approached jazz poetry with a real clear sense of discipline, and we've talked about this before. Like, I'm fascinated because I know the poems on the page, and right, in some poems you add repetitions to match the music. Yeah. And so Lawrence makes adjustments for you, and you make adjustments for Lawrence, so that this isn't simply, not that there's anything especially wrong with a walking bass line or the equivalent, noodling with some jazz for, and a stimulating sensory experience. But in your case, no, this is music. They're like, first and foremost, it's music, and the poetry is joining that.
I'm so honored when the musicians say to me, when we played together, we played there, and they treat me as one of them. It's my approach to poetry. I also performed with Martin Hayes, the great Irish fiddler, and when we first did that in Kilkenny, we did it recently in Kansas City and in Boston, and it's counted as one of the greatest compliments I've ever received. I did this with Martin the first time, and he said the beautiful sentence, "You are a musician." And poetry, every sentence has a melody. Yabba bamba da da da. Besides that, Roy Haynes quoting Mingus, I'll also bring in the great comic Sid Caesar, who in his book, his autobiography, he says, comedy is music.
Mm-hmm.
And it's how you say the punchline or the setup. And sure, in the 2,000-year-old man, Carl Reiner thinks of great questions and Mel Brooks has great answers, but it's in the cadence and in the melody. So Jesus came into your store. And they can do it better than I just did. And that's music. That is pitch. And people always talk about rhythm in poetry, and of course that's important. But music has harmony and melody as well. The vocalist saxophone player on the Proverbs of Limbo album, Stan Strickland, gives a quiz. He says, everybody knows all music has rhythm, melody, and harmony. Which do you think came first? Almost everybody says rhythm. And Stan says, no, I don't think so. I think melody came first. He says, my dog has a melody of when he's hungry, when he's scared. He says, baby sings happiness or unhappiness. Neither one of them can keep time.
Nope.
So melody is first, and that's related to what you said, John, about freedom and discipline. I think in all art, I mean, you can watch a polished performance to just stick with music, whether it's a rap artist or I've talked to people who were in Ray Charles's band. He was so exacting. He had such strict rules. And if you just departed a little bit, you were in trouble. And the effect, when you watch the performance, is of liberation, immense freedom. And it's not a contradiction. It's not even a paradox. It's the goal.
Well, with Ray Charles, right, there's this explosion that happens with the music. Yeah. And if people are astray in that band, that explosion can't happen.
Yes, it's the perfection of your craft that allows the freedom.
Can you talk about adding musicians? Because, I'm a big fan of the poetry jazz that you've done, and I'm a fan of the form, but I also recognize most people don't have the ambitions that you and Lawrence had for it.
Well,
and adding musicians is a really interesting touch. And when I put the album on, I gave the company the money and downloaded the files. And when that first song came on and I heard a saxophone, I'm like, oh, okay. Yeah. The rules have changed and the relationship has changed. Can you talk a little bit about how you came to invite other people into the music?
I'm not fluent in musician, but I speak in high school. That was my main social presence. I was in my graduating class. I was not most literary boy. I was certainly not voted most likely to succeed, but I was voted most musical boy. So if there was a dance, I'd be there blowing into the saxophone, and that was my ambition, really, until somewhere in the first couple of years of college, I decided I would be better at poetry. So I know how to communicate with these people, and we have Berklee School of Music in Boston, and the musicians on Proverbs of Limbo, Stan Strickland, wonderful John Lockwood, bass player, they all teach at Berklee. So these are very sophisticated people who also can do any kind of music. They have that quality where Charlie Parker, sometimes he had to play an Italian wedding or a Greek wedding or a Jewish wedding. He could do it. I knew exactly what he had to do. And Lawrence and I have often narrated the first time we went into a studio together. And we knew which poems we were going to do, and Lawrence had studied the poems very carefully in the way of an English class. And he wanted to talk about that. And I said, you know what? let's just listen to the sounds. Just take it as though it were a tune. And some of the tracks on that first Poem Jazz album, I'm sure some of them are probably first or second take. You know, he was in a booth, I was in, we could see one another, and we could hear from one another in the headphones. And it's all, as so much of music is, it was all about listening. And for me, poetry is about listening too.
So about freedom and discipline, one of the things I love about a lot of these poems in Proverbs of Limbo is how discursive the poems can be. And yet there are very clear lanes of communication, so that it's not simply, okay, now we're in Denver and now we're in Brooklyn and now we're in Brazil, so that there are these different channels. And at first the audience has to wonder, okay, what's going on here? And there's a charm as we can see, okay, now another piece is being added, and now, okay, we're going back to the first line of communication, and that's being extended. And the joy of that is compounded as we keep reading, we keep listening.
I hope it's like a really good conversation.
And then the three conversations become one.
Yeah.
In the listening, and that can't happen in a linear fashion to have that experience.
I think that intense relationships and friendship and love, anything that has a loving erotic component to it, it's not linear. It has its own rhythms and harmonies. And somebody said poetry is a centaur. Yeah, it's, in a way it's music, and in a way it's talking. And it tries to do both at once, which is different from the other great art of songwriting. It is different. Songwriting is setting words to music. What we're doing on the Poem Jazz albums, and what I hope I'm doing in the book, is talking that is also music, or concentrating on the part of talking that is music. Somebody pointed out, somebody said nobody ever speaks in I-ams. She says, what about, is there a doctor in the house? We do it all the time. It's whether the melody is interesting or not, and then it is whether it's Shakespeare or if it's Mel Brooks and Carl Reiner. The melody is a big part of the talking, and the talking is a big part of the melody.
Well, if we get self-conscious and we think, okay, I now must speak in iambic pentameter, we are likely to fail.
Yes. But we do speak in melodies.
And we use iambic pentameter. We use pentameter all the time, and we use iambs all the time. It's only after the fact that we can acknowledge that without pain, perhaps.
The comedy team, Cook and Moore used to do it. They would do mock Shakespeare. And let's see, I think if I could really try, I might talk in fairly decent lines that made 5 iambs in a row. It's not the most impossible thing to do. It's not the most impossible thing to do. It is a bit unnatural, but not entirely. Soul making. Galactic broth, visible, light years away, brews the first suns. Familial. I feel I know these lights. I see their prebiotic geometries of purpose, the way I impose human, nearly literary intentions onto the microscopic animals, flexing bizarre mandibles that patrol my eyelids and guts. Brothers and sisters, electronically revealed, arcane, mute dynasties of being. Darkling, I too perform the turns and bits of my assigned proportions. Feigning rapt comprehension, I know you, the way an infant pretends amazement each time the mother, with the spoon tip searching under the jar's rim, finds more and yet more of the strained apricots and apples. Infant, the sunflower turns toward her, deep Egypt of shared attachment and concealment, tangy preserved sweetness forging in turn the courtly generation of, call it a soul. So it's the telescope and the microscope, and they both look like it's not the first time I saw this. Of course it's the first time I saw it. It's the amazing telescope found what it's like, looks like when a son is born. But something in the images, you respond to it. And then when they show you that in your body there are all these science fiction looking creatures.
Mm-hmm.
Hello, brother. They look, as with the sons being born, they make you remember when you were born and your mom fed you strange baby food.
Impossible though it is, it's familiar.
Yeah. And that word familiar has family in it. And the religious way to say it is we're all God's creatures. And that applies to what we discover with our electronic magic as well.
Robert, always a pleasure.
Same here, John.